Hello, I'm Fauna Wyatt, and we will be talking about a non-conventional case study presentation on a government expert paid by influenza vaccine manufacturer. This is for research in ethics and integrity. So what we want to do today, I will discuss some correlations between European and United States' responses to pandemics and conflicts of interest. This is a non-conventional research, and it was approved by Professor Vandenberg. This case was centered around the 2009 swine flu pandemic response in the UK. The novel swine flu was an H1N1 variant. It was first identified in Mexico in early 2009. It mainly affected the population under the age of 65. The WHO declared a public health emergency in April of 2009. The UK convened the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, aka SAGE. It is a 20-member panel that suggests mitigation of public health threats through suggestion of antiviral therapies and vaccination to the 4 prime ministers of the United Kingdom. On this panel sat Professor Sir Roy Anderson. GlaxoSmithKline is a London-based pharmaceutical company. Under the advice of SAGE, the UK government entered into a contract to provide antiviral therapeutics for stockpile and vaccines for the novel H1N1 strain. Sir Roy Anderson was also a paid board member of GlaxoSmithKline, earning £116,000 salary in 2009. This case study was selected from Case Studies in Public Health Ethics, and it is professor approved even if it differs from peer-reviewed research-based literature. As in other ethical concerns earthed in the course of this semester, the methods of this case study involve investigative journalism. The Daily Mail released an expose linking Sir Roy Anderson to GlaxoSmithKline. Both the UK government and GlaxoSmithKline claim no conflict of interest due to Sir Anderson sitting out of SAGE meetings where GlaxoSmithKline products were introduced. However, there's no public disclosure on SAGE attendance or agenda during meeting, so that means that Sir Roy Anderson's abstinence from conflicting interest was not verifiable. In fact, he did appear on BBC Radio in May 2009, publicly lauding therapies and vaccines provided by GlaxoSmithKline. The Daily Mail expose led to calls from the public and some members of Parliament for investigations. No investigations followed, and even during the current pandemic, conflicts of interest are still being cited in the United Kingdom between vaccine manufacturers and governmental officials. An independent review post-swine flu found that the UK overreacted to the threat of the virus, although at the behest of the World Health Organization. There was also too much trust put into SAGE and not enough dialogue between its members and the prime ministers. Too large of a stockpile and treatments for swine flu, after a deal was reached to cancel 1/3 of GlaxoSmithKline's Pandemrix vaccine that had been pre-ordered without even being ready for a clinical trial. But GlaxoSmithKline didn't suffer any financial loss from the cancellation, as other therapeutics were substituted. So did we have results? Sir Roy Anderson was appointed rector of the Imperial College of Medicine after a scandal at his previous institution involving him citing a colleague's alleged sexual favors leading to her promotion. And in 2016, Sir Roy Anderson was appointed to the Nominations Committee for GlaxoSmithKline, which ironically oversees conflicts of interest. Some of you might be wondering, what does this have to do with the United States? What does this have to do with the presence? But these ethical concerns have global implications. Not only SAGE was exposed to financial conflicts of interest, members of WHO were also. WHO's influenza expert was paid by Roche, the makers of Tamiflu, to market their therapies. WHO recommended stockpiles of Tamiflu and GlaxoSmithKline's equivalent Zanamivir to all nations. Both antivirals and the Pandemrix vaccine were fast-tracked in the European Union, but more stringent clinical studies in the U.S. found little difference between these treatments and a placebo, and the FDA did not approve them. WHO defended the overreaching response and claimed those asking for further transparency into conflicts as conspiracy theories. Pandemrix was also later linked to narcolepsy in children, and several legal payouts happened in Ireland to those affected. The FDA and more stringent policies help protect our citizens this time, but our issue is the WHO and lobbyists for the pharmaceutical manufacturers that direct much of the global medical response. The WHO swept it under the rug with the closed meeting, Fake Pandemics, a Threat to Health. Government experts, pharmaceutical industry leaders, and WHO representatives were in attendance, but no public discourse followed. Now that we've been faced with a more dangerous pandemic, SAGE is still not required to disclose financial interest publicly. The H1 pandemic light exposed conflicts of interest that are still ongoing. Calls for reform were ignored or pandered to with closed-door meetings. A global consensus is needed. Non-disclosure leads to a distrust in the government. Even though the United States has legislation for directing disclosure for financial conflicts, publishing of awarded government contracts within 30 days of award, and competing bids for contracts. The COVID pandemic response here saw flagrant violations of law. Operation Warp Speed for vaccine distribution was directed by a former GlaxoSmithKline executive, who was still a large shareholder. The Trump administration bypassed all disclosure of interest declarations during this time period for public health. Contracts were awarded without competing offers, and awards were not published publicly within 30 days. Lobbyist influence was nearly untraceable in the early days of COVID-19 pandemic in the U.S. Citing errors in the heavy-handed response to swine flu from the WHO, citizens were wary of the true emergency of COVID-19 presented, and time was lost. Distrust in big pharma is still costing lives to this day. The pharmaceutical industry is the most influential lobby in the U.S. The Robert Koch Institute is a large driver of public policy through financial means. Literature review shows that the conflicts are still ongoing and reactions need to be metered to data supporting severity or else risk losing public trust. But I think it's too late. Conflicts of interest still continue, making citizens wary and costing lives. U.S. citizens' distrust of WHO led to diminished response here, and big pharma financial giants led to vaccine mistrust and lives lost. Something more needs to be done on a global level to aid citizens in trusting that they will receive fair and ethical treatment during times like these. The world cannot go on like this. Thank you for listening to my case study on financial ethical violations during times of pandemic. Hopefully we can get some consensus together and conversation going among ourselves so that we can prevent these types of serious things from happening during our next pandemic. Thank you.